The grand hall of the Xyphorian Alliance shimmered with opulence, filled with towering figures from every corner of the galaxy. Nobles and warriors stood adorned in ceremonial garb, their piercing gazes fixed on the small figure at the center. Princess Xyra, last heir of the Lirvian Empire, stood motionless under their scrutiny. She had prepared for this moment her entire life. The courtship festival was an ancient tradition where royal alliances were forged, but as she looked around, she already knew the outcome. The Drakthor warlords, their massive reptilian frames exuding power, barely spared her a glance. One scoffed, his voice a deep growl. Too fragile. A single battle cry would shatter her bones. The insectoid Krishka clicked their mandibles in disapproval. She bears no warrior's mark. What legacy could she continue? Even the synthoids, their mechanical minds built for precision, found her lacking. Statistical probability of survival in a political conflict, negligible. Xyra remained still, her delicate bioluminescent skin dimming with each rejection. She had expected this, yet the weight of their words pressed down on her like an unrelenting tide. Her people, once respected diplomats, were now considered relics of a weaker time. The Lirvian Empire was on the brink of collapse, and no one wished to tie themselves to a dying dynasty. Strength ruled the galaxy, and by their measure, she had none. The murmur of disdain rippled through the chamber. A noble from the Tvalian delegation smirked. No suitors. A shame, truly. Perhaps a servant's life would suit her better. Laughter followed, cutting deeper than she expected. She turned to leave, her fate sealed. But before she could take another step, a voice rang through the hall, calm, steady, undeniably human. If no one here sees her worth, then perhaps the galaxy is blind. The chamber fell silent. Heads turned, eyes narrowing as they sought the source of the disruption. A single human stood at the edge of the gathering, his stance unwavering. His uniform, though simple, bore the insignia of Earth's diplomatic envoy. Commander Elias Carter. A ripple of confusion spread through the hall. Humans were newcomers, still carving their place among the great empires. They were tolerated, observed, but never considered equals. A Drakthor warrior let out a guttural laugh. A human dares to speak here? Carter met his gaze, without flinching. I dare because you all dismiss what you do not understand. He turned to Xyra, his expression unreadable. Strength isn't just muscle or steel. Sometimes it's the ability to endure. The court watched, expecting Xyra to reject the human's absurd declaration. But for the first time that night, she saw something other than pity in someone's eyes. He had spoken not out of duty, but conviction. And that, more than anything, made her hesitate. The trial grounds were silent except for the hum of energy barriers locking into place. High above, the Xyphorian elite watched, waiting for the inevitable failure of the human who had dared to challenge their judgment. Carter stepped into the arena, unarmed, facing his first test. A Drakthor warrior loomed before him, twice his size, thick scales glinting under the artificial lights. The trial of strength was designed to be decisive. Humans lacked the raw power of most species. This would be over quickly. The signal rang out. The Drakthor lunged. Carter sidestepped. Fast. He didn't try to match brute force with brute force. He ducked low, using his smaller frame to slip under the massive swing of his opponent's arm. The crowd murmured, unimpressed. Evasion was delaying the inevitable. But Carter wasn't running. He was learning, watching how the Drakthor moved, how much force he committed to each strike. It was a pattern, and patterns could be broken. The next time the warrior charged, Carter moved toward him instead of away. The shift threw the Drakthor off, just enough for Carter to angle his weight and use the alien's own momentum against him. A pivot, a sharp twist, and the larger warrior stumbled, crashing to his knees. Shock rippled through the audience. It wasn't dominance. It was adaptation. The match was called. The next trial began. Carter stood before the council, the test of intelligence unfolding through a holographic simulation. A political crisis scenario, two factions at war, negotiations failing, imminent collapse. The usual solutions had been exhausted. This was a test designed for failure, meant to expose his inexperience. He studied the simulation, then did something unexpected. Instead of choosing one of the provided diplomatic strategies, he broke the scenario. He bypassed the predefined options, challenging the system's assumptions. Instead of negotiating for peace, he created leverage. He found weaknesses in both factions, using their own distrust against them. A new solution formed, not through compliance, but through pressure. The simulation recalibrated. The test should have been unwinnable, yet it had been beaten. The council exchanged uneasy glances. The final trial began. A psychological endurance test, designed to fracture the mind. Carter was plunged into a sensory void, his consciousness bombarded with visions of failure, his homeworld burning, his crew abandoning him, the slow, crushing weight of isolation. The test worked on certainty. It showed inevitabilities, absolute losses. It was meant to break resolve. But humans were not wired for surrender. Carter did not fight the visions. He let them come. Let them drown him in despair. And then, when the weight became unbearable, he kept going. Pain, fear, loss, these were familiar things. Things humanity had survived before. When the test ended, he was still standing. The hall was silent. No one had expected this outcome. No one knew what to do next.